The Arizona sun burned low across the fields as Jordan Hale, a billionaire in polished boots, stepped out of his black Range Rover. He hadn't been here since the funeral. Dust clung to the air, but what made him freeze wasn't the land. A black woman, sleeves rolled, was working the soil with her bare hands. 3 small children watched from a distance, each with the same storm gray eyes as his own. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Jordan blinked hard, thinking the heat was playing tricks. But when the woman straightened, the truth hit him like a punch. Keisha, his voice cracked. She turned slowly, calm but fierce. You finally remember this land, or just what it's worth. The sound of her voice stripped 10 years from his life. He had left her with nothing but divorce papers and silence. And now she stood before him, strong, older, her dark brown skin glistening with sweat and sunlight. This is private property, he snapped, trying to hide his guilt behind authority. Keisha's hands never stopped working the soil. I've been farming it for 2 years, Jordan. Feeding my kids from the land your company forgot. His gaze shifted toward the children, a boy and 2 girls. The boy clutched a wooden crate of corn. The twins leaned against each other, studying him with quiet curiosity. Those eyes, his mother's eyes. Don't, Keisha said sharply as he took a step closer. Are they mine? He asked, barely above a whisper. Keisha exhaled. You tell me. You're good ownership, right? The kids flinched at the edge in her tone. Jordan swallowed hard, unable to look away from them. One of the little girls dropped a corn husk and ran to Keisha, hugging her leg. He crouched to their level, voice soft. Hey, what's your name? The girl tilted her head. Grace. Mommy says names are earned. The words cut deeper than any lawsuit ever had. Jordan stood again, his chest tightening. This wasn't negotiation. This was Judgment Day. He opened his mouth, but Keisha raised a hand. You don't talk here, she said. You listen. Jordan stared at her, at the woman he once called his wife. And for the first time in years, the billionaire had no answer. The evening wind swept across the fields as Jordan followed Keisha toward the small farmhouse. Every creak of the porch sounded like a reminder of what he'd abandoned. Wait, he said quietly. You're really living here? Keisha didn't turn. We're surviving here. There's a difference. Her voice was steady, but her shoulders carried years of weight. She opened the door, and the scent of cornbread and soap drifted out, the same smell that used to mean home. Inside, the children sat at a small wooden table, drawing on scraps of paper. The boy looked up first. Mama, who's he? Keisha hesitated. Just someone who forgot where he came from. The word stung, but Jordan didn't argue. He looked around, patched curtains, broken clock, everything spotless despite the struggle. Why didn't you call me, Keisha? He asked. You could have, I did, she interrupted. But your number didn't exist anymore. The only thing that came back was a letter with a lawyer's name on it. She pulled open an old drawer near the counter and took out a folded envelope. The paper was worn soft from time. I kept it, she said, not because I wanted to, but because it reminded me what silence costs. Jordan reached for it, but she pulled it back. You don't get to read it here. You get to remember it. The children's laughter drifted from the table, a soft sound that made the room hurt more. He noticed how neatly their crayons were lined up, how one of the girls had drawn a stick figure with gray eyes and a hat. They don't know me, he said. Keisha met his gaze. They know enough. They know I work. They know I pray. They know I don't lie. That's more than they can say for their father. He stepped closer, but she didn't move away. Keisha, I didn't leave because I stopped caring. She cut him off, eyes blazing. You left because you could. That's the only reason men like you ever do. The silence between them was louder than the wind outside. He wanted to speak, to explain the deals, the stress, the mistakes, but nothing sounded like truth anymore. Keisha looked down at the envelope, then set it on the table beside the children's drawings. Tomorrow, she said quietly. If you're still here by morning, maybe you can earn a reason to open it. Jordan glanced at the kids again, their small faces, their mother's strength, and realized the hardest part of coming back wasn't being forgiven. It was learning he didn't deserve to be. The sky outside the farmhouse had turned black by the time Jordan reached his truck. He didn't start it. He just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the porch light flicker behind him. Through the window, he could still see the shadow of Keisha closing the curtains. The message was clear: go face yourself before you face us again. He finally drove off, headlights slicing through the dust until he reached a lonely roadside motel, the kind that still used metal keys and flickering neon. He booked a room, dropped his suitcase on the floor, and stared at the cracked mirror above the sink. The man staring back wasn't the billionaire who conquered skylines. He was a man who had run out of excuses. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, and let his memories bleed in. He saw Keisha at 25, laughing on the porch with sunlight in her curls, her hands covered in paint from fixing that same old fence. He remembered her voice on the phone the day he signed his first big deal. "Don't forget who you are, Jordan." He did. He opened his wallet and slid out an old photo, a faded picture of them standing in front of her grandmother's house. Her smile was wide. His eyes were young. He had traded that moment for a penthouse view and a calendar full of meetings. He rubbed his thumb over the photo and whispered, "What the hell did I do?" Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance. The desert wind rattled the window frame like an accusation. He thought about the envelope she had refused to hand over, the letter that might hold the truth he was too proud to read years ago. For a man worth billions, it was strange how worthless he suddenly felt. He picked up his phone. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of emails, all meaningless. He turned it off. The silence in the room was heavy. Not empty, just waiting. He lay back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles above him. For the first time in years, Jordan Hale didn't dream about skyscrapers or deals. He dreamed about dirt roads, laughter, and three little faces with his eyes. And when he woke up, before the sun had even risen, one thought anchored in his chest. He was going back. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. By dawn, Jordan was back at the farmhouse. The first light of morning stretched over the fields, turning the dew into tiny sparks. Keisha was already outside, sleeves rolled, her hands deep in a bucket of chicken feed. The kids were chasing each other barefoot through the dust, their laughter echoing against the barn walls. He stepped out of the truck quietly. "I thought you'd be gone," Keisha said without turning. "I was," Jordan replied, "but I realized something." "What's that?" "I don't want to keep leaving every place that makes me feel small." She gave him a long, unreadable look. "Then pick up that shovel. Breakfast doesn't grow itself." He blinked. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," she said, tossing him a pair of work gloves. The billionaire crouched awkwardly beside her, hands sinking into the dirt for the first time in decades. The kids watched from a distance, whispering. Grace giggled. "Mommy, he's gonna ruin his fancy shoes." Keisha smirked. "Then he'll learn what work really costs." For a while, no one spoke. The sound of rustling grain, the cluck of hens, the rhythm of breathing. It was more grounding than any board meeting Jordan had ever attended. When he finally looked up, sweat clinging to his forehead, Keisha was watching him. "You're not built for this," she said. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I'm trying to be." The smallest twin, Ellie, ran up holding a broken windmill toy. "Can you fix it, mister?" He hesitated, then knelt. "Let's see." He adjusted the loose screw, spun the blade gently, and it whirred to life in the soft breeze. Ellie gasped. "Mommy, he fixed it." Keisha looked down, hiding the faintest smile. "Miracles do happen," she said. Jordan chuckled, then wiped his hands on his pants. He wasn't winning her over, not yet. But for the first time, he wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was earning it one handful of dirt at a time. As the sun climbed higher, the children danced around their mother. Jordan stood beside them, muddy, tired, and oddly at peace. He had spent his whole life building empires. Now, he was learning how to build home. The sky that afternoon had turned the color of rust. Heavy clouds rolling low, warning of a desert storm. Jordan stood by the fence line, sleeves rolled, his hands rough and blistered from work. He felt alive for the first time in years. But that peace didn't last. A white pickup truck pulled into the dirt road, tires crunching over gravel. A man in a tan suit stepped out, sunglasses glinting even in the shade. "Mr. Hale?" he called, voice slick and practiced. Jordan tensed. "Who's asking?" "Logan Bradford, acquisitions for Thorne Industries. We spoke years ago about liquidating rural properties." Jordan's jaw tightened. "You're trespassing." "Apologies," Logan said, smiling like a snake. "I just came with an offer. This old farm's barely standing. The woman here, what's her name, Keisha? She doesn't have a deed. You do. You could sell today, walk away clean, 7 figures easy." Jordan's fist curled. "You've done your homework." "Of course," Logan said, brushing dust off his suit. "But so have we. It's not a good look. A billionaire letting a single black mother squat on his land." That line cut deeper than any insult. Keisha appeared from the porch, wiping her hands on a towel. "Something wrong?" Jordan turned toward her, steady. "Just a man trying to buy what he'll never understand." Logan laughed softly. "Be reasonable. This place isn't worth saving." Jordan stepped closer. "You're right. It's worth fighting for." The wind picked up, snapping at the man's tie. "Suit yourself," Logan said, heading back to the truck. But storms have a way of changing people. As his engine faded down the road, the first crack of thunder split the air. Rain started in sudden, angry drops. Keisha ran to pull in a laundry, the kids grabbing toys and baskets from the yard. Then she shouted, "The barn door's open." Jordan didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the rain, mud splashing against his boots. The latch was gone, the door slamming wildly in the wind. He braced his shoulder against it, forcing it shut, securing it with an old chain. Inside, the animals cried out, spooked and restless. He stayed until the wind eased, soaked to the bone, but still standing. When he came back, Keisha was waiting on the porch, holding a dry towel and something new in her eyes, respect. "Guess you learned how to stay," she said softly. Jordan exhaled. "Guess I did." The storm finally passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean. The sky glowed silver. Puddles glimmered like mirrors across the yard. Jordan stepped onto the porch, hair still damp, his hands aching but steady. He'd barely slept. He didn't want to. Something about last night, the way Keisha looked at him, had felt like a second chance waiting for proof. Inside, she was drying the kids' clothes near the stove. "Storm didn't scare you off," she said, without looking up. "Not anymore," Jordan replied quietly. "I used to think storms were things to run from. Turns out, they're just tests of what you're willing to hold on to." Keisha said nothing. She just nodded once, eyes still on the fire. Jordan glanced toward the hallway. Something near the corner caught his eye, an old duffel bag, half torn, lying by the wall. He bent to pick it up, but she stiffened. "Don't," she said sharply. He paused. "Why? What's in it?" Keisha hesitated, then sighed. "You want truth? Open it." Inside the bag was a small tin box, a folded baby shirt, and 3 worn hospital bracelets, each with a name and date written in faded ink. "Grace, Ellie, Samuel." Jordan's breath caught. They were born while I was gone." Keisha looked at him, eyes unreadable. "You were there. You just don't remember." He froze. "What do you mean?" She reached for the photo, tucked beneath the bracelets, a picture of her in a hospital bed, holding 3 tiny newborns. Next to her, asleep in a chair, was him. His head rested on her shoulder, hand cradling one of the babies. "I took it that night," she whispered. "You held them. Cried, even said you'd never leave. The next morning you did." Jordan sank onto the edge of the table, the photo trembling in his hands. "I thought I left before they were born," he said, voice breaking. "You left right after," Keisha replied. "I stopped waiting for apologies and started teaching our children how to live without them." Silence stretched. The sound of the fire crackled softly. Finally, Jordan looked up, eyes wet. "Keisha, I can't change what I did, but if you let me, I'll prove I'm not that man anymore." She crossed her arms. "You think one storm washed your sins away?" "No," he said, "but maybe it gave me the strength to face them." Her expression softened. Not forgiveness, but recognition. "Then stop talking," she said. "Start showing." He nodded. "Every day, starting now." Days turned into weeks, and the desert began to bloom again. The earth smelled of rain and second chances. Every morning before sunrise, Jordan was out fixing fences, hauling feed, or patching the roof. No sweets, no calls, just dirt, sweat, and small hands tugging on his sleeves. Grace, Ellie, and Samuel had stopped calling him Mister. Now it was just Jordan, sometimes Daddy, when they forgot to be cautious. Keisha watched quietly. She didn't make it easy. She wasn't supposed to. But she saw the difference. The way he stayed through the hard hours. The way he listened instead of talking. The way he laughed again. Small, genuine, unpolished. One afternoon, the children came running across the yard, carrying a piece of painted wood. "Mommy, look," Grace shouted. "We made a sign." The board was crooked, splattered with too much glitter and crayon hearts. In the center, big messy letters read, "Hail home." Jordan froze. Keisha stepped forward, tracing the uneven strokes. "You named the treehouse after him?" Samuel nodded proudly. "Because he fixed the roof and the water, and he doesn't leave when it rains." For a long moment, Keisha said nothing. Then she looked at Jordan, really looked, and something in her eyes finally let go of the past. That night, they all ate dinner together for the first time. No music, no speeches, just clinking forks and the sound of laughter bouncing off the walls that once held silence. After the dishes were done, Keisha handed him a folded quilt and a pillow, just like before. "You can take the couch," she said softly. "For now." Jordan smiled. "For now is enough." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "Good work today with the kids." He nodded, voice low. "Good work?" Raising them. She gave a faint, tired smile and disappeared down the hallway. Jordan looked at the photo of the kids on the counter, then at the sign resting by the window. "Hail home." He didn't own this land anymore. He belonged to it. Outside, the moonlight touched the fields, and the wind carried the soft hum of life rebuilt. For the first time since he could remember, Jordan Hale, the man who once had everything, finally had something real. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.